So when we're talking about egress and how you can egress, let's say you are in a large city and you kind of have very limited options to get out before a major event happened. And this emergency got to the point that you had to leave. Now, which options and which types of routes would you take? Would you take probably the most common, a large highway or an interstate, as most would, by vehicle or by foot? Would you go also maybe in a different route, maybe by boat if you had a waterway, or would you follow the waterway by foot until you got into a more safe location? There's also the option that you could take and walk and use the railroad tracks to get out of an area and to connect you to other known areas that you think that may be safer, or at least have the the midway point. So maybe you know that, okay, this is about halfway between these two cities, and if I just go ahead and set up camp here, I'm in between the two cities that they may both have an emergency. And so what you're trying to do is trying to create the most distance from these emergencies if you had to egress. So having landmarks is a lot better option in general than trying to rely on a map and compass or a GPS that may or may not be working. That's going to be a lot clearer for you, because when stress sits in, and I mean real stress, and you're limited in supplies, maybe you only have enough water for a few more hours, and you need to get the heck out of your city, and you have maybe no food and very limited provisions, you might be even lucky to even have a bug out bag, you're going to want to actually just create that distance, because in your mind, safety is going to be the #1 priority, because you see all hell breaking loose and you see resources being stretched to the limit and maybe even non-existent. So just remember, yes, the interstates and highways can be a way, can be a point of movement, but it could be congested. There could be marauders, gangs that are set up there. There could even be checkpoints, and you may be a victim there. So I would go to a less populated option, more like the railroad tracks. But I think that large bodies of water, following that, or if you can get into that large body of water on a boat, maybe in the middle of a large lake. You wouldn't have to go like in the middle of like one of the Great Lakes here in the United States, but I would go at least a little bit to the point that you can't be seen from the coast of the shoreline, which for most people that's going to be between 3 to about 10 miles in the waterway, so that you can't be seen, and that'll give you a little bit of cover there just from the horizon. But it just depends on how high in elevation the person is on the coast, and if they have any type of binoculars or any type of magnification optics. So you got to just consider that. I would definitely be on a boat and move into a larger body of water. That would be my first option. And then I would probably use other landmarks that would be very easy to identify as a secondary route. But always have a good map that has landmarks and not just so much longitude or latitude numbers, because under stress you're not going to be able to really sit there sometimes and just crunch numbers and do these triangulation techniques, and you're going to be doing more like a point of sight, A to B, how do I get to this location, and you're not going to be wanting to fuss around with all these other semantics. So just remember that there's all kinds of different ways to move about besides using big roads. And I even had at one point an old neighbor that actually had his own, and this was just an average Joe, someone that just had a decent middle class job, no one wealthy at all, but he saved up and built his own airplane. It was a very small amateur airplane, and it was almost like a hover plane, or a glider plane, but it worked really well. And he had his own little landing strip. He had a few acres of land, and I'm not saying to do that. I'm not saying you should have a hovercraft or even a small helicopter, but these are options for those who already do this as a hobby. So instead of having to worry about, what am I going to do? You might already have the answer, especially if you're already like someone that's into outdoor sports and you have a pontoon boat, or if you have a swift water cruising boat. You may, even if your fishing boat's big enough, you may be able to get out in a little bit deeper water and just to kind of weather a little bit of time. But just know your limitations on your gear and your transport options. But as always, thanks for watching, and just kind of think out at least 2 or 3 options to egress out besides the main roads, and at least a couple other options for transportation of that, and maybe a plan of action to kind of make those decisions to get out as early as possible, so you're not one of the hordes that wait to the last moment. And you guys take care.